Hello and welcome to the All Things Social Impact podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Kanaris, and I'm here with Ildiko Simsic. Ildiko, would you like to introduce yourself and let people know a little bit about yourself?
Yes, hi Andrea, thank you for inviting me. I'm Ildiko Simsic. I work as a social development specialist. More recently ventured into the technology aspects and how they relate to E&S work. But I've spent the past 15 years working with and for different IFIs and developers. I've worked globally across sectors and industries, various different projects, largely covering resettlement, labor, stakeholder engagement, and more recently, supply chain management.
It's an impressive. And thank you for joining me because I know you're in London, I'm in Brisbane, so a bit of a time difference. So thank you for being patient with me to coordinate a bit of time. But you left a few key things out that people might be interested in. One is that you're an author and there is a book. So we'll make sure we put that in the link, and also a link to your business around AI, which I'd like to get to eventually. But for particularly the early career people who will be listening and watching this podcast, could you give a little bit of your story around what attracted you to social impact? And I guess what social impact means to you?
Yes. So my first book is called What is a Social Impact? Exactly because the context around what a social impact is so diverse, especially as the sustainability industry has been evolving these past many decades. So social impact is kind of like everything and nothing. Everything, it really depends on the context. And the reason I wanted to write that book is to specify these contexts that we're working with, because very often we're working with NGOs or community development. That's the proactive positive impact creation aspect. But very often, if you're working for a regulator, an IFI, or a developer, you also have that aspect of compliance, and how these two aspects are completely separate. Because one, you have to meet certain requirements to comply with a legislation or a standard. And the other one is you're really working with the community to identify additional needs that are not related to your operations. And here's the second category or context that I offer in the book is one, is it related to your operations, this impact, like the influx of the workforce, or the impact of possibilities opening up for local businesses to join your supply chain? Or is it that some social issue that you recognize or you're passionate about that's not related to your operation? So for example, when you donate for homeless shelters, or you let your employees volunteer to, again, create positive social impact, that's completely separate from your operational risks or impacts. And also the other thing that I mentioned is the difference between macro and micro level impact. So very often when we talk about sustainability and ESG, we look at high level impact. So what a company's headquarters is doing for employee well-being, diversity, equity, and we're looking at the big picture. And in our world as social performance practitioners, we're very much zooming in on the site or the micro or the project level impacts and risks. So this is my brief answer on what a social impact is.
It is very diverse, and it's really interesting, I think, because we met at the IAIA conference in Dublin last year. And I was talking, I suppose, a little bit about that. And you mentioned something that I kind of picked up, which is that disconnect sometimes between, say, grant fundings and community development funds that companies set up, that are quite often funding things that have nothing to do with the impacts. And sometimes at the expense of not necessarily managing their impacts, and that sometimes the expectation that will improve their relationship, they're quite often sometimes a little bit baffled that they're going, but we've given all this money and we do all these things for the community, but they're still not happy with us. And it's because you haven't managed the impacts as well as the other stuff. So it's a really interesting, because social impact is so many things.
Exactly.
So many things. Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. So you've had a very interesting career. You've worked around the world. I noticed that you've done like gender studies, and you mentioned that you've applied it in supply chains and community development. And you picked up on a really, and I think one of our conversations we've had since we've met, you also talked quite a bit about how your current work you're doing with the AI and getting into the technology side of how that can assist in social impact. But at the same time, you made an interesting comment when we were talking that you went, but when I'm talking to the community, I'm old school. I've got my pen and paper.
Exactly. I'm very low tech when I do my job because I think a lot of the times it's it's very personal. Social impact management and social performance is very personal.
Yeah.
And I got the best results, people opening up about their fears, sharing their concerns when I was just sitting down with them, no phone, no screen, no technology, just us having a tea or a coffee and just talking, because they also, we are also people. We see a lot of people in vulnerable positions, a lot of different life paths across the world through our
Yeah.
job. And we also need to go there with this human nature and being able to connect with the affected people so that you build that trusting relationship and they're able to open up, because often we're recording very sensitive information.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really good point. So for young people listening who are sort of hoping to get involved in whether it be international work or whether they stay local, but it doesn't really matter where you do it. When you're doing social impact, you are dealing with vulnerable people. So, and that's what you were alluding to. That's something that you don't get taught in your courses. How do
No.
you do that? And what would be your sort of in terms of how do you build that relationship, build the rapport, so that you do it in a sensitive way that really connects with people, so that you get an accurate reflection. Because people don't tell you, from my experience, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I've found that people don't tell you straight off exactly what it is that concerns them. You have to build that rapport before they'll open up and sort of trust you with the really important things.
Yeah, exactly. So I studied sociology as my bachelor's and then social research for my master's. We were taken on site visits in Hungary to rural Roma communities who are marginalized, vulnerable. So I
Yeah.
had that exposure to this type of field work and like ethnographic studies and anthropology and these participatory research methods and how, your bias will always be there, but how do you
Yes.
like mitigate that? How do you just sometimes just sit back and observe and listen and ask these open-ended questions? So I think my education contributed to being able to like do this. But then there's also this element of emotional intelligence that I don't think is like taught, but it's an incredible skill if you work in the social impact sphere,
Mm.
and you have to be there because when you're on the side talking to communities, you are a person as well. Like you have thoughts and feelings, and some things might touch you so deeply that I remember, especially early career, I remember going back to my hotel room and just like crying because of what I witnessed and what I saw, and nothing prepares you for that.
I agree, and those things stay with you for sure. I've had similar experiences, mostly early in your career, where you've been involved and been exposed to some extremely vulnerable people living in some extremely. And I always like to say that I find it a privilege when someone tells me their story. I don't ever go in with this idea that they somehow owe me their story, but I feel I need to earn it, and it's a privilege when they actually open up. But with that privilege also comes a responsibility, but it definitely touches you and it certainly stays with you.
Yeah. And I definitely felt like my role is to be there, observe, listen, make notes, and then use whatever tools I have, whether it's the compliance, whether it's the business case, whatever tools I have to turn their fears or needs and wants into like things and deliverables that I can present to the bank, the developer, the whoever, for them to fund it and eventually translate the needs and fears into a language that's understandable for the lender group or the developer, and like make this thing a reality. So in a way, I looked at my role as a translator, researcher, observer, who's like in the middle and like listening to both sides, understanding both sides, and just trying to like bridge the gap.
What a wonderful way of putting it, and a wonderful approach. I mean, that takes quite a skill to interpret that into something that, because they're very different worlds. The people who are very vulnerable are living a very different experience than, and the drivers of businesses, or like you said, banks, development banks or whatever, sort of have very different views of the world, drivers. So it's quite a skill that you have to be able to take that story and purpose and build it into and deliver it in a way that actually packages it up to something that they can support, because then you're really transforming people's lives.
Yeah, so I had some incredible mentors and like inspirations very early on in my career. I don't know if we can name names, but it was Michaela Bergman at EBRD, who was the chief counselor for social issues. And if anyone knows her or remembers her, she was a very passionate woman who was very persistent and did not give up. And she had this real passion for development. And I learned to keep this like the fire alive, but
Yeah,
translate it into messages that make sense for the banking teams. So this way, whenever we went for anything that was beyond the compliance aspect, we always built up the business case, translated the messages. So we had strong enough justification for these non-development people to understand why this matters in the long term. Because also that time, it worked well for projects where the construction phase was relatively long. Because the one thing that I realized
yeah,
is for a lot of my recent projects, that some of them renewable, some of them just like short construction phase, the developer is only there to develop, and then is someone else operating the asset.
yes,
So telling them that, you need to invest in these community engagement, community development, livelihood restoration. For them, it's like, yeah, we're out in 14 months. Like, makes no sense. But if we're talking about hydropower, roads, pipelines, where the construction phase is like 3, 5, 7, 10 years,
yeah,
like it really makes sense for them to invest early on in establishing these relationships, because then they will be able to solve issues much faster once they arise, because
yeah.
they will happen.
They will. That's true. And I think increasingly we're seeing evidence, and companies are really feeling it when they don't. The voice of the people is certainly, they've got more confidence in terms of being able to push back, and finding that they're being supported by the regulators in doing so. Yeah, that's. I think the business case is a good skill set to have, and you've come from that banking world
Yeah,
quite a
yeah.
bit,
So
which is
just to reply to your earlier question, so
yeah,
my career was non-standard for E&S performance management. So I started with an internship at EBRD
yeah,
at the Civil Society and Gender Unit, because my interest was in gender. So I was doing the research for the country strategies. And then I found out that there's this other department that does the projects. I was fascinated with the resettlement. I read everything I could find on the internet and the intranet. And like when my internship was coming to an end, I just printed my CV and knocked on Michaela's door, because I checked she's the main person. And I
yeah.
said, I'm so fascinated with this world. I want to do this, and I have so many questions. And that's how early on I managed to get into the social performance management. But I know most people start out in one of the consultancies to do the ESIAs. So my route was the complete opposite.
Opposite. But what a great story, and what a great, I think that's a really great message, particularly for people who are um, either wanting to change careers or early in their career, to be bold when you see something you want to do, when you've got an interest, to sort of, but you didn't just knock on the door and be bold. You'd done your homework. You'd sort of explored it, understood exactly what you wanted, but being bold enough to knock on the door and say, "Hey, I'm
Yeah.
really keen." I think that's great because I that's something I've said to people before. Like, don't be afraid to ask for what you want.
Yeah, and I guess, I have been reflecting on this and I included like snippets of this in my book, how
Yeah,
the skill set and the career paths and the jobs in sustainability changed. So when I started, I had no idea what social performance management was and like these impact assessments. And it wasn't something that was taught at a university.
mm,
With a degree, they were looking for people with degrees in sociology, anthropology, gender studies, development economics, something like this. And then you picked up, okay, performance management, we're checking this, like fine, okay. But
yeah,
now there's so many different avenues. So a lot of these regulations come with the reporting requirements. So there's a need for data scientists, for example, to gather the data and like present it in the report. There's also the other aspects of like, the proactive positive impact creation. So it's not just the strictly speaking performance management. And even that has changed over the past like 15, 20 years significantly, with more and more private sector players voluntarily signing up to meet international industry best practice.
yeah. There's definitely been a significant shift in the last 10 to 15 years for sure,
Yeah.
particularly in the social side of it. I
Now you
think,
can learn social impact assessment as your master's.
yeah. I learned it whilst I was at university, but there was at that time there weren't many. It was one of the few that actually taught it at the university level.
And I think it's also because Australia had the legislation to incorporate. So most of our countries in Europe, we have the EIA legislation that has some social component, but it's nowhere near a social impact assessment.
Yeah. No, even here it's grown significantly, and certainly the focus on ESG and the S in ESG has driven it even more. But we've seen a diversification into the social enterprises as well. So it's springing off into all these other different areas, which I think makes the career options for people really interesting. The international development, whether you've got a business bent but you want to be, socially conscious, there's lots of different avenues that didn't exist, I think, once upon
Yeah,
a time,
exactly,
for sure.
exactly.
Uh, whilst Australia did have the social impact, what we didn't see a lot was the management planning stuff, the performance side of it. It kind of was like, here's the social impact
Yeah,
assessment, and then nothing kind of happened formally. There was for a little while in Queensland, then it went away, and now it's back. It's yeah, the social performance I think is something that I love. The fact that it's finally getting traction, because my career was a bit upside down from yours. I started in government, and a lot of my first use of my skill set that I learnt was statewide evaluations of social programs and those sorts of things. So really around the
yeah,
performance and the
it's very
measurement
different.
and the data, and then got into the social side. I kind of did it a bit backwards as well. So I've always had a bit of an interest in that evaluation performance side of things.
Yeah,
Yeah. So now that we're talking about data, I think it's a really interesting, because you've done a complete, not complete change, but in some ways on the surface, it would look very different with your new venture, which I think would be really nice, because I think it's a really contemporary subject that not a lot of people are talking about. And you're definitely on the forefront of it for the social performance and the social impact space, because you're actually actively using AI. And I don't think I know anybody else who's certainly as far ahead of this game than you are. So would you like to explain to people what it is you've actually got? And of course we'll put links to your business so people can set it out. But certainly you've done some amazing things that would be really interesting for the viewers to understand what you're doing with its solutions.
yes, it's E&S Solutions. I founded a company last year, but we have actually been working on some ideas since before. The whole idea came from my increased workload in countries where I haven't worked before and I didn't speak the language. So anything related to these legal research on resettlement and expropriation was very, very challenging because there wasn't a centralized source. So, and this coincided with the AI boom, and like everything was like the original ChatGPT emerged and like people were like interested in this. And I was lucky enough to be exposed to people working in fintech and this sphere. And one day we were talking about the issues in my industry and how, we're still very careful with using technology. And for the social, like as I said, I'm low tech when it comes to doing my face-to-face work, but not when it comes to simplifying tasks that take so much time. So for example, for a large ESIA, gathering the secondary baseline data, going through on average like 7 different websites maybe, and maybe even that's not enough.
Yeah.
And then going through other studies when, I thought that the most important and meaningful part of my work is to interpret this. Like, what does
Yes.
it mean for my project? What does it mean for these people that I'm working with?
Yeah.
So when I started looking at my workload and tasks and time allocated for different things, I just said to myself, like, I'm wasting so much time on things that don't really matter. Like, nobody cares how I acquire this data. It needs to be in there, but it needs to be interpreted. Yeah. It needs to be translated. Again, a translator. What does it mean for my project? So we figured out that we could like use automation and AI to build a knowledge base of all the project documents, legislation, international standards, everything that was ever disclosed in the E&S sphere, and all the data that I was using for my job. And then use a large language model to access it in an efficient way. And then came, we built the prototype and we started like playing around with it. And then we realized that there's no sources. So how is it better than ChatGPT? I'm like, okay, we can put in the sources. And then we realized that the naming conventions for these project documents are not unified at all, to say the least. So I came up with a naming convention that makes sense to me, that included the publisher, the year, the country, sector, project name. So I could have a quick glance. And if I was asking a question related to, I don't know, resettlement, I wanted the wrap of that project or a wrap from that country to be the reference. So we built an AI script that automatically renames the documents from the information contained inside. And that's how we built MyESRA. That stands for My Environmental and Social Research Assistant. And this is a very conservative AI product. So it's not doing any predictions or big calculations, anything like that. It just helps you access this vast knowledge base efficiently.
That's amazing, because I know anyone who's done any large scale ESHA
It's a pain. It's a pain.
is sitting there going, sign me up. The amount of time we spend, like you say, just pulling down and retrieving existing information
Yeah.
related to it before you can even start to do the interpretation is
Yeah.
phenomenal. And it's a lot of different data sets, and that's not even including the ones that you have to collect yourself. That's not even the primary.
Yeah.
It's
And
just, like you say, the secondary. It's an enormous task. So, how to give people some idea, and for some of the junior ones who maybe haven't had yet the opportunity to be involved in a large scale ESHA, how many hours do you think you would save, sort of the way you did it before, to using something like MyESRA?
I think it's like cut in half,
Yeah.
easily cut in half. Because I could go online and go like, I have a oil pipeline going across 3 countries. I need an outline or a structure for an ESIA. So I get the structure. What is it that needs to be in different chapters? And then I could ask, okay, what's the list, the expropriation legislation in this country and that country? And I have that straight away. And I can click in the reference document and access the original information, because we own a copy. So I can get more context, the gap analysis, the previous data that was collected. And I think the other added value is having access to primary data that was collected for other projects in the region,
Yes.
because that's something we haven't really done. So we looked at national statistics, but we didn't look at like ESIAs for projects in the region to understand the context around land use or livelihoods or transportation routes, or what were the issues flagged for these other projects that are close proximity to ours. And that's a very valuable, like, additional information that can greatly influence the mitigation measures.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic insight, even to have that before you go out and do your own primary collection, because you're not going out there ill-informed. You have some sense of the kinds of things that
Exactly.
these people are concerned about, and you can be a lot more sensitive when you have some idea. I suppose it gives you a kind of head start in a way in terms of the conversations you need to have, or even crafting any kind of surveys or
Yeah. And it's not because we don't know how to do it, but it just provides you with like a little structure that you can then like tailor or build on, or adjust to fit your project needs. So this is our first the flagship product. And in February, so again, I had another issue where I had a large project with pre-disclosure ESIA and the management plans that will most likely never be disclosed. And we had thousands of pages. And it was like a group of, I think, 5 experts, all covering different fields. I had to do the full social. It even had cultural heritage, resettlement, supply chains, labor. It was everything.
everything.
And it was, I'm not going to say impossible, because we have been doing it this way, but it was just very challenging to read through everything and make sure that all the commitments from the ESIA are in the commitments register. Every single thing from the ESIAs and the relevant management plans, right? So I was thinking, okay, how could we like make it easier for myself? So we created the private ESRA, which is launching in a few weeks. And this is where the users can create teams. So you can invite your project team, upload your documents, and interact with the documents. It allows for different formats: PDF, Word, photos, images, videos, even spreadsheets, emails. And you can just like get that additional support to check, sanity check certain things, because sometimes we change a job description or a position in the labor management plan,
Yeah.
but it's not changed across the management plans. And again, it's not doing the work for you. It's just helping you doing the time consuming work.
Yeah. And I think you were right when you said up front. I think a lot of us know that the real value that we add, and all our knowledge is actually the value add is the interpretation, is being that translator of all the information, and why is it relevant to the project, and how can it actually inform some kind of management plan and solution to the community. But if you're spending all your time uh,
Yeah,
on
yeah, and
these
it's
tasks that really don't add value. They're important and you need them, but they don't add value in and on themselves. So what
yeah,
you've done is really created an amazing ability to give the professionals the headspace to use their time more effectively doing that value add work that often sometimes, I don't know if you've experienced this, and I think it might resonate with a lot of people, that gets cut short because you wish you had more time to not rush through that critically important bit, which is what is the solution to these problems that we've
yeah,
identified.
exactly. And I love what I do, so
Yeah.
I wanted to enable myself to do more of the good parts, the parts that I enjoy: designing mitigation measures, making sure that the management plans make sense for my project, my context, this community, and spend less time on the tasks that I quite frankly often dreaded.
Not just you, I think all of us are sitting there going, yeah, yeah, no one not too many people relish those tasks at all. It's not why we get into social impact, right? I believe most people that I've come across that work in this field, I think just everybody I've come across that works in this field, choose it because they want to make a difference, because they really care about, you know, providing positive impacts in the world, whether it be in their, whether they work at the micro level, the macro level, they all want to make a difference.
Yeah, and I guess our workload is only increasing now that, you know, private sector players like do more impact assessment or social impact work. Even if we step away from the compliance and like the IFI aspects, there's
Yes.
just so much more reporting, documentation, management planning that's going around that, you know,
Yeah.
this was not like this when I started. Yeah, we had a lot of projects and we were always like, but this is like next level now.
Yeah, the regulatory environment has shifted, and there is a lot of compliance now, I think, in this space that wasn't there before, for sure.
And even just the voluntary disclosures. So a lot
Yeah.
of medium, bigger companies, they often have like an ISO standard. They often have sustainability reports. They often report on CSR. They have to have their policies on their websites. Those policies say that they will be like reviewed and updated like regularly, whatever that means. So there's just a lot more work around that, even if we look at, as you said, this like broader context.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a lot more of this voluntary companies that just, and I know I'm increasingly finding the shift from trying to explain to clients why you need to do social impact, into companies that are quite proactively see it as important. I think there's definitely seen an increase in that with
Yeah,
companies that I work with. Take it a lot more seriously,
yeah.
voluntarily, not just because, you know, they've got to be compliant. So I think that's a lovely thing that makes the job easier as well when you're working with a client who wants to do it just because they think it's a good thing to do.
And it's lucky they found you, because often we get lost in some of these like buzzwords, like when everyone's talking about human rights, it's like, oh my God, we need to do human rights. What do we do? Who do we call? What is it? What does it mean for us? And again, it's like a context thing, right? Like
Yeah.
which aspects of human rights does your company like influence through its operations or
uh,
more broadly, and how do you operationalize that? How do you make sense of that for your business? And that's where I find a lot of people and a lot of companies are trying to enter this social impact, and there's countless podcasts, books, but it's coming from the non-performance management approach. So it's largely focusing on positive, proactive impact creation related to high level ESG and like corporate sustainability.
mm,
And it's often missing that critical, like operation specific management.
yeah. I still would love to see more site specific social performance people. I mean, we're starting to see a lot more of those jobs being advertised, people looking for people local for that social performance, which is wonderful, because that's when you really see these documents that people spend so much time researching, and these management plans are wonderful, but they don't mean anything until somebody's actually can put them into action
Yeah.
on the ground in an ongoing fashion.
Yeah, and even when there's like a groundbreaking legislation like the Modern Slavery Act here in the UK, like that was one of the first ones that ever like dealt with this like modern slavery, forced labor, child labor, like in this context and the human rights. But again, the legal requirement is an annual statement that says that you don't support modern slavery and maybe list a few things you've done throughout the year to like make it happen or support your like justifications. But a lot of companies don't even comply with that. And when I started talking to people outside of our performance management industry in the broader sustainability industry, They had no idea that we exist. And whenever they were thinking like, okay, like we need something on supply chains and human rights, we just go to the big four, like not our performance management big four, but the other big four. And I was telling them, okay, you will get a policy, you will get a statement, you will get these like goals, aspirations, and words, but they don't have the people or the expertise and experience to turn those into actionable deliverables for you. That's our industry. That's our superpower. And I have been campaigning for this for many years now, because that's really, really, really strong added value that E&S performance practitioners can bring to any sustainability discourse.
Couldn't agree with you more. I am very big on the community development skill set that gets downplayed or underplayed, because that's what actually brings these things to life. That's where the magic happens. I mean, you can have all sorts of wonderful things in your management plan. You can have great metrics, a great little framework, but unless you've got that kind of person who understands community development and what are the pillars to move someone from here, and it's even first understanding where the people are at so that you know where to pitch it.
Exactly.
Because I've seen a lot of these programs, and I can't help but think of the Indigenous people in Australia, for example, where it's a terrible situation that hasn't improved regardless of the amount of money. And I keep looking at it going, why are we pitching it above where these people are at? If, these people are living in they coined the term fourth world because of the conditions of the Aboriginal people in some of these communities. And yet we don't adopt community development in the same way an international development program would work. So
Yeah.
you're pitching it above where they are. So they're bound to fail, these programs, because they've not understood where you need to start and also how you bring people along that journey.
Yeah, and it ties back to what I was saying earlier, is you go there as a researcher to observe and listen.
Yeah.
And I had several projects, livelihood restoration, resettlement, where, the cookie cutter solution, oh, they had land, give them land. And when you actually went there, these people were like, no, we just want to sell this and have enough money to buy a flat in a nearby big city.
Yeah.
And we were like, oh, okay, that solves the problem. When we were worried about, oh, where are we going to put this like pylon for the overhead transmission line to not disturb this like agricultural land plot? And the person was like, can you just expropriate the whole thing so I can get rid of it? And this is exactly that. You go there with an open mind, not trying to tell them what you think is best, but listen first, observe and listen, take notes, and understand the situation.
Yeah. And I think you keep repeating the word because I think it really is the most important skill set you can learn in the social sciences, and that's listening, actively listening. And it's powerful. So if you've got a group of people, I don't know, you've probably experienced this thousands of times in your career, but you go into people who are vulnerable. Quite often vulnerable people have also found that they don't get listened to, that they're kind of frustrated, they're maybe even angry. But the most powerful thing you can do in that situation to shift the whole energy is to actually listen to them, like really listen, and let them know that they've been heard. And all of a sudden, these people that everyone thought was difficult, and you've probably heard this before, how do you manage to deal with all these difficult people? And I quite often say, I didn't find them difficult at all, right?
Yeah.
Because I spend the first however long they need to tell me all their woes.
Yeah, so I've seen like the whole full spectrum of it, from
Yeah.
the people not understanding that it actually matters what they say, that they can say things that are not necessarily positive, and I'll just take note, and I'm like not just gonna, I don't know, like snitch on them, like tell the developer you said that, but because we've experienced that too, that they didn't tell us because they thought we would just go back like the previous people and just tell them that, point fingers, like, yeah, that guy said that. And then I've seen the other side when the people already realize that there is a platform for them to share. So they shared a lot. and they shared very passionately. And it was like, shouting and like in a language that we didn't speak. So we just had to like, okay, deep breath. Like, I want to listen to everybody, but I don't understand. So please talk to the translator. She's going to translate. I'll take notes and then we can have a conversation.
Yeah.
And I think this is very relevant for like grievance management, where often, the developers get scared because as soon as they establish a good enough mechanism where people feel safe to share, they are sharing. They are sharing a lot. And the developers think like, oh my God, we have like 100 grievances. What are we going to do with it?
It can be overwhelming for them.
Yeah. When in fact, when I come into like audit or do a due diligence, I'm like, fantastic. The mechanism works.
Yeah. Yeah, we're the ones who aren't scared when they start talking, because that's a good thing. It's when I always, I'm always I'd be more concerned when someone's not saying anything, because it's like they've probably got something you need to know. And for whatever reason, whether they don't trust or they don't feel that there is a room for them to speak, then you can't resolve an issue that you don't know about.
Exactly. And, a lot of times you just assume that this is a problem for them or this is what they think, when in fact that's not true.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very true. Yeah. But it's a really nice feeling. I know I really enjoy it when I get to that point where I know that they trust me, particularly when there's someone who's got a really serious issue, not just and it's not to diminish any of the impacts, they're all serious, but some people have very serious concerns and they're impacted very seriously, and they're often vulnerable intrinsically anyway. And when those people trust you, it's really kind of a nice feeling.
Yeah, but that depends on like the
It's
governance
sad
of
often
some
as
of these.
well.
Yeah. It's sad, but it's a relationship that builds over time. So for those people who are going to start their careers for these consulting companies, our big four, they will be present on the projects for a short time. So you do like a couple trips, you write your ESIA, and then you won't be there to monitor. So you will meet the same person maybe twice, 3 times.
Yeah.
But it's really for those like longer projects where you over the years monitor the implementation and you establish that relationship. And if you're working in these community development programs, like more likely you will be there for the key milestones and you will be there long term. But if you're entering this as, entry-level consultant for one of these companies, you will feel like you're working on 10 projects, but you don't know them.
Yeah. So what would your advice be to someone? Because obviously you've been through this experience early in your career, you've gone through what were your challenges, and what advice would you give somebody when they get faced those challenges in their early career?
I think my challenge was that I was really interested in this performance management and IFI compliance world. And when I tried to exit this to enter the broader sustainability world, I found that my skill set was not understood and was not valuable for these people because they didn't know performance management.
Right.
They knew they were looking for program managers for charities. And yes, I had the skill set, but they didn't understand. Or they were looking for, ESG reporting people. And I had some of the skill set, but they didn't understand how I would fit in the picture. So I remained on this IFI, project finance, E&S compliance route throughout my career because of this.
Yeah, that's like the pigeonhole thing, isn't it? When someone, I know quite often it's really interesting because my first part of my career, I applied it, like I said to you, in government, policy, strategy, evaluation of social programs. But then I got into social impact, and quite often people go, she's a social impact assessment person. It's like, well, yeah, but I also do all
But
these
no,
other things.
Exactly.
all these other
Exactly.
things, and I've got a broad interest and I can apply it in a lot of different areas. So the pigeonhole thing is very real, I think.
Yeah, it is. I think it's still very, very real, especially for those that start consulting in on like IFI projects in this like performance management world, where you have the clear deliverables in these like documents and impact assessments and management plans. And you often have no exposure to the policy dialogue on the institutional level, or these like you don't have access to these conversations that happen within these institutions that shape the way you are going to do your work. Because I was there at EBRD for the policy review 2013, and yes, I was very young.
Yeah.
But I had the exposure to these discussions to understand how people think,
Yeah.
what matters. And I know, like, for many, many years, that policy was the one that's implemented for all of the bank's projects. And it's the same for the guidance notes on resettlement. Like, I have been involved in like designing some of those, or like scoping it, or little piece of work here and there. And those are very meaningful, because that's what you send to a client. Like, this is our policy, and this is our guidance note. This is what we
Yeah.
expect from you.
Yeah. So that's obviously very real. You've experienced, I know I've experienced it at times. Um, how did you deal with it? What would your advice be to people if they're finding themselves pigeonholed, but they want to do something else? And I think you've already alluded to one thing you did, which was just
Just go for it.
go
Just
for it.
educate yourself. Today and this day and age is the best time to get access to information. Now, literally everything is out there. You can learn anything for free or very cheap.
Yes.
And if something is very interesting for you, you can just go skill up and then print your CV and knock on a door.
I think that's really great advice because I think I think there still is some people who think they have to go completely re-educate themselves formally, but I think the current climate is that there are other ways to build on your existing skill set, your existing qualifications, and just top them up and adjust them and do what you did and be bold and say, I've done my homework, here's my CV, I'm interested, give me a shot.
Yes. And, it doesn't always work, but it's worth trying.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt.
And a lot of the times, from the questions you ask, they will be able to evaluate. After I was I have I was working with Michaela like on and off throughout my career,
Yeah.
and it was like 10 years later when we were having lunch in Paris, and she said, there was one question you asked the first time we met, and that stayed with me like throughout the years, because I asked, we're financing development projects. Do we ever stop a project because we think the human cost is too high? And
Mm.
she was like, oh, wow. We've stopped projects because of like bats and birds, but never because of humans.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to see a human centered decision making. I just think that it's a real tragedy at times when I see decisions that get made on the level of concern for a species of animal or plant that people will protest for, and yet children who are starving, people who are experiencing extremely tragic circumstances that are out of their control often, and these are not dealt with and not at the center of decision making, which is my personal beef with decision making processes. I really want to see a return to human centered decision making.
Yeah, but that again ties in with the pigeonholing, because if people like us don't have access to the policies and, influencing decision makers who create these regulations and, the focus for these companies, because the companies, they're incentivized to comply. That's, unless otherwise they get the fine. So that's why we see so many misaligned corporate sustainability aspirations, because their incentive is to have the ESG rating, is to have, this now CSRD compliant report, that's the incentive. But if more people from the performance management, whether it's environmental or social, have access to these tables and are part consulted, like stakeholders in this,
Yes.
then we could influence what gets asked for from companies. And that's why I was very happy to see the CSDDD, because it talks about the due diligence. It mentions management systems. It's the first time I've seen it in like a legislation around here. And I'm just so happy to see this shift
That's great.
towards less policy and like the big words and more action oriented management systems and reporting on activities, not just outcomes, but the processes.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the processes are important because you can only anticipate what you think an outcome's going to be or an impact's going to be. The process should be designed so that as you realize that assumptions you made were not necessarily correct, that you can adjust them instead of just going, it's fixed, like you said, the cookie cutter, or oh no, I've done the work now, we just implement it without checking our assumptions. It won't work. Having done my evaluation of social programs, the one thing that keeps coming up is these revolving doors, these funding programs that are failing. I look at homelessness as a perfect example of, I remember going to we were at a conference or something, and they were talking about being success at something like 20% of people was the success rate. The success rate of this program was 20%, and they were celebrating it. And I said, what other industry would celebrate 20% as a success? That's a failure. Yeah, for the 20% that you helped, that's fantastic. But there's a complete failure. There's 80% failure rate.
Yeah.
And it's intrinsic in this whole idea, like you said, not focusing on the process, checking the assumptions, and being prepared to accept that you may have not quite got that, what you thought the outcome was going to be, right. You've got
Yeah.
to be
And it's
prepared to be wrong and humble enough to go, I got that wrong. Let's go back and check our assumptions.
exactly.
Let's change the course. It's like, you wouldn't go out in a boat and continue to sail into the storm if you knew the storm was there, right? You would course correct, and then there's not enough course correcting.
Yeah, exactly. And especially for social programs and like social impact, like it's inevitable that things will go wrong somehow, or things will turn out differently to how you plan them. So instead of focusing on these like outcomes, like know this, know that, absolutely know this, we should focus on what processes we have. So if something goes wrong, we can fix it, or we can understand if it's a systemic issue, like something we've done wrong, or is it like a one-off, or is it like an unlucky accident, and now we can move forward.
Yeah, yeah. But if, like you say, if you haven't set up your processes to allow you to do that, then you just keep making the same mistake over and over again,
Yeah,
which
which we've
sadly,
seen.
it's a sad truth, but it's something we do see in the social performance space. I think because not enough social performance is being done by people with, like you say, if you see, for example, the ESG as a reporting exercise, that's a very different thing than actually seeing it as a performance exercise, where you're
Yeah.
actually going, how did we actually perform? We thought we were going to do this. What did we actually do? I think that's a very different approach, isn't it?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think, as I said, this new focus on supply chains and processes and management systems, I think
Mm.
this will really give the momentum for social performance practitioners to enter previously uncharted territories for people like us in the broader sustainability industry, because who are they going to hire? They can't have the same data analyst or reporting expert do this job, because they require a due diligence, they require field work, they require something beyond self-assessment, they require a labor audit. Like who are the people who are going to do it, who are qualified to do it? It's us.
That's true. That's promising. I mean, that's exciting, especially, like, I think supply chain does open up a can of worms for sure, because it's the out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. I sort of see it very similar to the uh, city versus country, rural town kind of thing. Like, it's easy to to, just not worry so much because you don't see what happens out there. So, you don't have to worry yourself too much
Yeah.
about it. And supply chain's a bit like that because they're usually so disconnected from what you see on a day-to-day basis with a business.
But not anymore, because whether, technology
That's
makes
what a can
everything
of worms.
visible.
Yeah, a
We
can of
makes
worms.
everything visible. Like someone in the other end of the world, like publishes something on social media about like the workers, the conditions, a rumor that's picked up by an organization or NGO or somebody who's more, you know, has more understanding of the issue and like the seriousness of this. And then next thing you know, we all know about it. So I think technology also changed and made these issues a lot more visible here.
The
And there's
truth, yeah,
definitely this awareness in the consumers. We've seen that over the past like few years,
I
that
think you're
they're
right. Yeah,
turning away from brands that have serious environmental or human rights violations, and the scandals are real and the fines are real. So there's a business case, yeah, like everything comes together nicely. And
yeah,
again, if we focus on this, the outcome that ESG says, okay, this is the outcome, you have no forced labor in your supply chain, then all these companies would fail. So this is really pushing them to focus on the process. And also, I think it's probably a good time to talk about the responsible exit, because we had projects where we just wanted, okay, we don't finance this, it's not our problem. I'm like, okay, but the problem will still be there. So even if you have this like supply chain where you have a supplier who's problematic or who has been non-compliant, like cutting your ties with them is not solving a problem, it's just making it some other company's problem.
yeah, yeah. The fix is, yeah, the devil's in the detail because it's, identifying it's one thing, resolving the problem is another.
Yeah.
And that's that's tricky. But I think supply chains is a really interesting one, and I think there's a lot of assumptions that can be made about the behaviour of a company or the performance of a company when you're not thinking about supply chains. You can make all sorts of, it can look
Yeah.
quite shiny and wonderful, but quite often I've said to people, "Are you sure about that? Have we looked at their supply chains?" Because
Yeah.
it might not be
Because,
quite what you thought it was. Yeah,
and again, like it's the disconnect, right? We have major companies with outstanding ESG ratings that operate facilities without environmental permits within the EU, for example. How are these two things reconciled? Why are these two teams not talking to each other? How can it, parade around like a sustainable company when it, discharges without a permit straight into the river? And this is, I'm sure there are so many other examples. So again, this is where we have the power as performance practitioners to like bring these to light and work with these other teams. Like, okay, guys, you report on this, but there's this other part of the business and this needs attention as well.
yeah. It's not as easy to push out your responsibility to somebody else, to a third party or fourth party
Yeah.
down the line, to say, well, it wasn't me. It was,
Yeah, it was
I
someone
see.
else. Like I told them to wear the PPE, but they did not.
Yeah,
We
the
like
oldest trick in the book.
I've had clients that ring fenced investments. So they said like, okay, we are allowing like underage people to like work on in this plant or this field, but they're not working on the stuff we sell you. That's problem solved for the company, but not problem solved in
Yeah,
general.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Problem solved for who? Well, yeah,
Yeah. And what problem is solved? The company's compliance, not the child labor part.
yeah. It's been amazing talking to you. I could talk to you for hours, but I might leave it there just because I know you've got a day to get on with. But I'd love to have you back again at some point to maybe have a focused discussion. I know you're working on other books, and maybe when you finish that book, we can talk about the topic of your next book, which will be interesting as well. I'm sure that viewers would love it. So thank you, Ildiko, very much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'll let you go.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to talking to you again.
Always a pleasure, Ildiko. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thank you for watching, and if you're listening, thank you for listening. Remember to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe. When you subscribe to the channel, I get more guests, and we can all learn, grow, and share our stories together. Thank you for listening. Remember, hit the like button, share, subscribe.